The kid who lives above me bounces a ball all day and all night. I finally had enough and went up to confront him. That's when I saw it. The ball he was slamming against the floor was his father's head. Two people must share a room. No more, no less. Every resident must find a piece of meat. Each pair must patrol the building for one night. Spend one night as a guest in an upstairs neighbor's apartment. Hide the bratty kid's ball. Choose the female neighbor's favorite outfit for her. Find the building manager. I join a high-stakes reality show. Complete all the challenges, and the producers grant you one wish. A bus dropped us off at this strange, deserted apartment complex, and then all the crew members vanished. We were left with nothing but Spartan runes and a piece of paper with a list of rules. I cautiously opened my door. The hallway lights flickered erratically. A hunched-over old man, jingling a massive ring of keys, was shuffling toward us. He wore an old-fashioned, military-style suit and kept his head bowed low, his face hidden in the shadows. All residents, come out and choose your roommate. His voice was a raspy, muffled rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. As soon as he spoke, doors creaked open one by one. Every room is for two people only. If there's one too many or one too few. Ha ha ha. A grotesque laugh echoed down the hall, making the hair on my arm stand up. Everyone stood in silence for a few seconds before scrambling to find a partner. We'd all been brought here by some bizarre force, but no one was an idiot. We all accepted the reality of the situation pretty quickly. I picked a girl who looked like a student. When I chose her, she gave me a small, hesitant smile. All right, choices have been made. Return to your rooms. No one is to open their door tonight. For any reason, my new roommate and I went back to our apartment. Her name was Phoebe. We exchanged a few awkward goodnights and went into separate bedrooms. Around midnight, I heard a sound outside the door. Tap, tap, tapping, like someone was gently scratching at the wood. I tiptoed to the door and pressed my eye to the peephole. It was a woman in high heels, limping. Strands of greasy black hair fell across her face. One of her eyes had popped out of its socket, dangling against her nose by a thin, bloody nerve, swinging back and forth as she moved. Her other eye bulged out, a fleshy ball that seemed to grow from the socket. A dark, unknown liquid dripped from her purplish lips. Her limbs were completely mismatched. One leg was much longer than the other, which was why she limped. She was leaning against the door across the hall, her dangling eyeball swiveling to stare into their peephole as she sniffed at the doorframe. A few minutes later, she moved to the next door and did the same thing. I was still watching her when she suddenly turned and started limping toward my door. I dropped to the floor, my body trembling, and scrambled behind the sofa, trying not to make a sound. After a moment, there was silence, but I didn't dare move. Sure enough, a few moments later, the tapping started again. Help me. What is that thing? Help. Please help. Open the door. Somebody help me. A blood-curdling scream tore through the hallway. I didn't dare get any closer to the door, terrified of being discovered. The next morning, all the residents were trying to find the source of last night's screams. In front of apartment 3015 lay three bodies. Their eyes were wide with terror, even in death. Their stomachs had been sliced open, their organs were gone, and blood pooled on the floor around them. Some of the more timid residents were already crying softly. This is insane. I don't want to wish anymore. I want to go home. Let me go home. Once the trial begins, you cannot quit. Otherwise, you end up like them. The old man appeared out of nowhere, gesturing toward the three hysterical girls. They didn't follow the rules. Three of them stayed in one room last night. From now on, you'll be good and listen. Iknot, hiv hiv hiv. The old man let out that horrible laugh again. Outside, it was still pitch black. The only light came from inside the building, leaving the old man's face a blurry, indistinct mask. There's not enough meat in the cafeteria for lunch. You need to find some. I'll be back to collect it at 11 o'clock sharp. I glanced at the wall clock. It was already 9 a.m. We only had 2 hours. Back in our room, we found that breakfast had been delivered. Phoebe and I wolfed it down and then rushed out to search for meat. There was no telling how many floors this building had. The staircase leading up was like a bottomless abyss. Just standing near it made me shiver. Our floor wasn't full, So we started searching the empty apartments meticulously. After checking 3 empty rooms, I finally found a piece of meat under a sofa. But before I could even feel relieved, it was snatched from my hand. "Hey, thanks for finding this for me. I'll be going now. Good luck with your search." A burly man grinned, holding my meat, and sauntered off. I clenched my fists, then let them fall uselessly to my sides. A guy his size could take on 5 of me without breaking a sweat. I checked the time. 1 hour left. I started searching again, moving faster. Nothing here. Nothing in this one either. I searched several more rooms and found nothing. Panic started to set in. Time was up. Besides me, 3 other people hadn't found any meat. I could already see the old man making his way down the hall. He stopped at each door, collecting the pieces of meat. One girl who hadn't found any trembled as she spoke. I couldn't find any. I looked everywhere, I swear. The old man licked his pale, gray lips, his eyes glinting with greed. He wiped a trickle of drool from his chin. Suddenly, he lunged forward and bit down on the girl's head. The sound of crunching and chewing filled the hallway. The girl didn't even have time to scream. In seconds, her head, flesh, and blood were gone, leaving only a clean skeleton standing for a moment before it clattered to the floor. Everyone who witnessed it was petrified. We all wanted to scream, but were terrified the old man would eat us next. We could only clamp our hands over our mouths, tears streaming down our faces. He swallowed 2 more people whole before patting his stomach contentedly and stopping in front of my door. "Where's the meat you found?" Shaking, I pulled out the meat I had found and handed it to him. Suddenly, everyone in the hallway was staring at me with a strange expression. The old man himself froze for a second. "This is the meat you found?" He snatched it from my hand, his expression unreadable. A collective gasp went through the hallway. The piece of meat in the old man's hand was a severed human forearm. At the last minute, with no other options, I had gone back to apartment 30 fighting back my fear and nausea. I had hacked an arm off one of the corpses. The rules didn't specify what kind of meat, I stammered. The other residents stared at me in horror, as if I were some kind of monster. Phoebe's face was pale. She must have regretted rooming with me. The old man, however, just smacked his lips. "Human meat. That's meat, of course." As he walked away, everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. "Listen, Phoebe looked like she was about to cry. I sighed. I'm not a psycho. I'm just trying to stay alive. Time moved strangely here. With no sunlight, you couldn't tell day from night. We had to rely on the clocks in our rooms. The old man delivered every meal. They always looked balanced, with meat and vegetables. I only ate the vegetables. I couldn't shake the fear that the meat was what we'd collected earlier. The memory of hacking up that corpse made my stomach churn. Tonight's patrol has new rules. You must inspect the floor above and the floor below. If you find a neighbor who hasn't gone home, you must escort them home. If you find a neighbor who isn't wearing shoes, you must find a room with a number 6 and hide inside. If a kind neighbor offers you candy, you must only eat the ones with a crying face on the wrapper. You might encounter all of these scenarios, or you might not encounter any of them. Ha ha ha. It all depends on your luck. The old man finished explaining the rules and jangled his huge ring of keys. Tonight was the turn of the residents across the hall from us. It was 2 men, one of whom was the guy who stole my meat. They were both big, muscular guys and didn't look too worried. Their physical size gave them confidence. All right, the patrol starts at 10 p.m. sharp and ends at 6 a.m. Phoebe and I went back to our room. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "You should get some sleep," I said. And I'll say it again, I'm just doing what it takes to survive. She was definitely traumatized by me. I sighed and went into my bedroom. I wondered if those 2 guys would make it back alive. The next morning, we woke up to piercing screams in the hallway. 2 headless male bodies lay on the floor. From their clothes and build, it was clear they were the 2 men from across the hall. The female residents were wailing and crying. The men were all pale-faced, their eyes wide with shock as they stared at the scene. The old man appeared with a pushcart, tossing the bodies onto it one by one. He turned and looked directly at me. "You 2 are on patrol tonight." Phoebe burst into tears. Even I felt a wave of panic. The image of the headless corpses was seared into my mind. What were we going to face tonight? I replayed every word of the old man's instructions in my head, committing them to memory. Phoebe just sat there, staring blankly at the clock on the wall. I'm no saint. I wasn't going to spend my time comforting her. After everything we'd been through, it was time for her to toughen up. If she held me back tonight, I would abandon her without a second thought. My only goal was to make sure I survived. The hallway outside was dead silent. Let's start with our own floor. The dim yellow light stretched our shadows long and thin. Phoebe followed behind me, trembling. We had already been through this floor while looking for meat. It was a single long corridor with rooms on either side, like a hotel hallway. When we reached apartment 3015, I noticed the door was ajar. It was pitch black inside. I wondered if the corpse that had been by the door was still there. A cold, eerie wind blew out, raising goosebumps on my skin. Come in. There's a way out in here. A sharp, piercing voice echoed from inside 30. I steadied myself, walked to the door, and kicked it shut. The voice inside fell silent. Let's go. It can't get out, I said. How? How do you know it can't get out? Phoebe whispered. If it could get out, it wouldn't be trying to lure us in. Aside from 3015, our floor was quiet and uneventful. After finishing our floor, we stood at the foot of the stairs. The stairwell above was shrouded in darkness. The lights seemed to be broken, offering no illumination. I turned on my phone's flashlight, its narrow beam cutting through the black. This place had no cell service, but the basic functions still worked. Thankfully, the battery was full. The stairs were steep. We climbed 2 flights and arrived on the floor above. The layout was identical to ours. Dim yellow lights, a long corridor, and an unnerving silence. Phoebe grabbed the corner of my shirt, her whole body shaking as she followed me. I took a deep breath and started walking. Every door was shut tight. It was impossible to know if anyone lived inside. We made about a third of the way down the hall without incident, and Phoebe was starting to relax. Maybe we'll get lucky and not run into anything. Let's hope so. No sooner had the words left my mouth than I saw a figure standing ahead of us. It was wearing a black silk robe with a large, white character for longevity printed on the front. Its hair was a dry, tangled mess, and its head was bowed low. Its withered fingers ended in long, black nails. Phoebe started shaking uncontrollably. The figure was standing right in the middle of the hall. We had to pass it to complete our patrol. I looked down at its feet. It was wearing shoes. That meant it was a neighbor who hadn't gone home. We had to escort it. Looking at the terrifying figure, I felt a knot of fear in my own stomach. It didn't look human, and we were supposed to take it home. Phoebe and I slowly approached it. Hello, we're your neighbors from downstairs. We're on patrol tonight. We can walk you home. The figure remained motionless, head still bowed. We were closer now. It must have heard our footsteps because it slowly raised its head. I clamped my hand over Phoebe's mouth to stifle her scream. I could feel her lips, cold and trembling. The man's face had only 2 dark, empty sockets where his eyes should have been. His mouth was no bigger than a fingernail. His nose was just a collapsed stump, completely sealed with no nostrils. Blood oozed from the empty sockets, tracing crimson streaks down his face. My eyes are gone, he rasped. I have to find my eyes before I can go home. It's dark now. How about I help you look for them tomorrow? He didn't answer. He just stood there, perfectly still. We'll help you look around here now. If we can't find them, we'll take you home, okay? With that, I grabbed Phoebe and started shining my phone's flashlight around the floor, pretending to search. He seemed surprised that I was actually helping him, and he watched me with those 2 black holes. We searched for a while, but couldn't see his eyes anywhere. Suddenly, I heard a gurgling, rattling sound like someone clearing phlegm from their throat. I looked toward the sound. Not far from us stood a figure holding a small box. The box was exquisite, tiny, and ornate. The figure's mouth was stretched into a grin that reached its ears. Its eyes were pure black with no whites. It looked at us and licked its lips with a long, forked tongue like a lizard's. Run. I grabbed Phoebe with one hand and the eyeless neighbor with the other. I saw that the creature with the box wasn't wearing shoes. We had to find a room with a 6 in the number and hide. I hadn't even finished the first task of taking the neighbor home. I had to drag him along with us and deal with that later. His sleeve felt unnaturally cold, a deep, penetrating chill. I couldn't imagine how terrifying it would be to touch his actual hand. The creature behind us was closing in fast. It was so quick, it was almost on top of us in a blink. Just then, I shot out my free hand, snatched the box it was holding, and shoved it in my pocket. The thing behind us froze, as if stunned that someone would dare steal from it. Then it let out a piercing shriek and flew at us. I remembered passing room 4006. I put everything I had into pulling them along, running for my life. The creature's hand was reaching for my collar. Just as its claws were about to grab me, I saw it 4006. I yanked them both inside and slammed the door shut. The creature outside shrieked in frustration, rattling the door so hard the frame groaned. I watched the door, terrified it wouldn't hold. A small crack appeared as the creature slowly pushed it open. Phoebe covered her mouth, huge tears rolling down her face. Suddenly, the eyeless neighbor beside me let out a cold snort. The noise outside stopped instantly. The crack in the door vanished. Phoebe and I stared at him, stunned. The walls of this room were black. There was only a black dining table and a black sofa. No other furniture. In the center of the living room stood a large, vermilion red coffin. The eyeless neighbor stood before the coffin. The room, combined with his appearance, was enough to make my scalp crawl. "Are these your eyes?" I took a pair of eyeballs out of the box. I'd found them in the box I'd snatched from the shoeless creature. After we got inside, I'd opened it and saw the eyes. He stood motionless for a few minutes, then reached out and took them. Right in front of us, he popped the eyeballs into his empty sockets. The moment the eyes were in place, the sockets stopped bleeding. His eyes were bizarre. Each eyeball had another eye inside it. When he looked at me, it felt like 4 eyes were staring, and it made my skin crawl. We didn't dare go back outside, afraid the shoeless thing was still waiting for us. The neighbor, his eyes now restored, stared at me for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of candy, offering them to me. The candies, wrapped in clear cellophane, lay in his withered hand. They were all pitch black. I remembered the old man's rule: only eat the candy with a crying face. For a moment, I was afraid to take them. He just held out his hand, making it clear he wouldn't pull it back until I took them. I accepted the handful of candy, but instead of eating them, I tentatively put them in my pocket, watching his reaction. He saw me pocket them, but didn't seem to care that I wasn't eating them. I breathed a small sigh of relief. "Where's your home? I can take you there now." "Home? This is my home." His words stunned me. We got lucky this time, completing 2 tasks at once. If I hadn't brought him with me when we ran, I don't know what would have happened. And now we were hiding in his home. Realizing he was reasonable, I tried to ignore his terrifying face and felt my fear subside a little. The task of escorting a neighbor home was done, and we'd hidden from the shoeless one. I had no courage to go back out there. So I shamelessly asked him, "Can we stay here for the night? We promise we won't bother you. We'll leave at 6. He didn't answer, just gave a slight nod. Then he opened the red coffin and lay down inside. Phoebe and I sat on the floor, our backs pressed against the wall. Some of the neighbors in this place were good, some were bad. You had to learn to tell the difference. Help the friendly ones, and you'll be fine. Run into one like that shoeless creature, and you might lose your life." We somehow made it to 6 o'clock. Phoebe and I exchanged a look of shared relief. We had survived. I walked over to the coffin and said softly, "We're leaving now. Thank you for letting us stay last night." There was no response from the coffin. Phoebe and I quickly left his apartment. "Hey, look," Phoebe's voice trembled. I turned to see what she was pointing at and gasped. The room we had just left was not 4006. It was 4006. No wonder that creature almost got the door open last night. We'd gone into the wrong room, but I was so sure it had been 4006. Had someone switched the number plates? And why were this neighbor's eyes in the possession of that shoeless thing? This floor and its residents were full of secrets. When Phoebe and I got back downstairs, we found all the other residents standing outside their doors. Seeing us return safely, they all gave us friendly smiles. In a place like this, we were all human. That connection was more comforting than dealing with whatever those other things were. The old man looked at us, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Which neighbor did you escort home last night?" "The neighbor in 4009. Did you run into a shoeless one? We did. We hid in room 4009 and managed to escape. After hearing my answer, the old man just stared at me. After a long moment, he turned and left with a look of deep meaning on his face. I exchanged a few polite words with the neighbors on our floor, and then Phoebe and I went back to our room to sleep. After being awake all night, I was exhausted. I woke up the next day, surprised at how long I had slept. The stress must have been getting to me. I hadn't had a proper rest in ages. I opened my door and saw that the residents who had been on patrol last night had returned safely. I overheard them saying their night was completely quiet, they hadn't seen a thing. This gave the remaining teams a huge confidence boost. Over the next few nights of patrols, 2 more pairs ended up headless. The others managed to escort their neighbors home and survive, shaken but alive. Tonight, all of you must spend the evening as guests in an upstairs neighbor's home. Rule 1. You cannot be kicked out by your neighbor. Anyone who gets thrown out, ha. The old man chuckled, then continued. Rule 2. You must eat all the food your neighbor serves you. No picky eating and no leftovers. The neighbors like people with stories. If you can entertain your neighbor, you'll get a gift. If you make your neighbor angry, you'll become a gift for your neighbor. At 10 p.m. sharp, go upstairs and find your hosts. Do we go alone or in pairs? Someone asked. That's up to your neighbor. A word of advice. Neighbors don't like large groups. Those of us who had already escorted a neighbor home breathed a sigh of relief. Phoebe looked at me with pleading eyes. Fine, I'll give it a shot. I'll see if the neighbor in 4009 will let both of us visit. That night, I took Phoebe and politely knocked on the door of 4009. Hello, can we come and be your guest for the night? He remained silent, but he stepped aside, leaving the door open. That was his yes. Phoebe and I slipped inside quickly and shut the door. At least we were safe for tonight. The pitch-black walls created a deeply oppressive atmosphere. Phoebe and I didn't speak, afraid that saying too much would annoy him and get us kicked out. The neighbor stood by his coffin, reaching inside for something. My eye twitched as I watched him pull out a piece of unidentifiable meat and some kind of white, sticky substance. I remembered the old man's rule. We had to eat everything our neighbor served. A chill ran down both our spines. Do you have a fire? I can cook. He paused, then pointed towards the kitchen and handed me the things from the coffin. The kitchen was spotless and fully equipped. I had Phoebe check the fridge for anything we could cook with the meat. Soon, I had a dish ready and brought it to the table. Thankfully, I had been proactive. I didn't use much of the coffin meat, otherwise there's no way we could have eaten it all. The neighbor didn't join us. He just watched silently as Phoebe and I finished our meal. Thankfully, the meat tasted more or less like pork. The old man had said the neighbors liked people with stories. I was in a tough spot. I didn't have any exciting stories to tell. I gave Phoebe a look, but she just shook her head, looking distressed. Fine, we'll forget about the gift. We'll just sit here quietly and get through the night. The neighbor went back to his coffin and started rummaging inside again. The sound of his long fingernails scraping against the wood was skin-crawling. After a while, he pulled something out. Hanging from his nail was a small, smiley-faced doll. He handed it to me. I took the doll. It looked like any other doll you'd see in the real world, but its smile was deeply unsettling. I thanked him and, in front of him, carefully placed the doll in my pocket. Seeing that I had accepted it, he muttered, "There's a bed in the other room you can sleep on," and climbed back into his coffin. I slept soundly that night. Even though I was rooming with a ghoul-like neighbor, after a few interactions, I realized he wasn't the type to kill randomly. This was by far the easiest task yet. When we got back downstairs, I noticed that most of the survivors from this task were the ones who had already escorted a neighbor home. We all gathered together, chattering excitedly. Some said their neighbor was lovely and the food was delicious. Others bragged about the gifts they had received. The ones who didn't show up, I guess they became gifts for their neighbors. After a 2-day break, the old man returned with a new announcement. Tonight, all residents had to work together to hide the bratty kid's ball. The brat is bouncing his ball everywhere and disturbing the neighbors. You need to hide it. The brat has many balls, but he only has one favorite. You must find a specific one and hide it. If you choose the wrong one, the brat's father will appear immediately. And if he appears, You might be trapped in that room forever. You cannot leave that floor to hide the ball. And remember, you cannot hide it in a neighbor's apartment. While you're hiding the ball, you're safe. You only pass this trial when the brat himself admits he's lost. If the brat finds the ball you've hidden, all of you will die. After the old man finished, I turned to the other residents. Did any of you stay with a family that had a child when you were visiting your neighbors? No, the one I stayed with was an old man. Mine was a young guy. Everyone chimed in, racking their brains. They all confirmed they hadn't encountered a family with a child, a neighbor we haven't met yet. I thought for a moment. That night, we all gathered on the floor above. We used the process of elimination, crossing off the apartments we had already visited. That left the rooms no one had been to, or the rooms from which no one had returned. I motioned for everyone to be quiet and listen carefully. The old man said the kid liked to bounce his ball and was disturbing the neighbors. Bouncing a ball makes noise. We should try to avoid the unvisited rooms. The last thing we wanted was to run into something like that shoeless creature. Thump, 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 thump. A sound like a bouncing ball echoed down the hall. We followed it to apartment 4017. Everyone looked at me, afraid to make a move. Have I become their leader now? It was clear no one else was going to knock, so I steeled myself and walked up to the door. Knock, knock, knock. I knocked and immediately stepped to the side. A moment later, the door opened. It was a very strange-looking woman. Her arms were unnaturally thin, like snakes. A red silk scarf was tied over her eyes. Her white dress was stained with what looked like blood. My pupils constricted. The woman had no feet, just two bare, rounded stumps at the end of her legs. I took a deep breath, averted my eyes, and spoke. We're the new neighbors. We came to pay you a visit. I offered her the piece of meat I was carrying. It was the leftover meat from 4009. I had brought it back with me, just in case. The woman gave me a small smile, her grayish-purple lips parting to reveal a set of stark white teeth. Thank you. Please come in. As we entered, the door slammed shut behind us with a loud bang. A few of the girls gasped and flinched. The room was surprisingly cozy, with warm pink wallpaper that made the space feel welcoming. It was also very neat and tidy. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of the bouncing ball was coming from a bedroom. We all exchanged a look. We'd found our target. Now we just had to distract the woman so we could get into that room. The woman, though terrifying, was surprisingly hospitable and offered to make us tea. I nudged Phoebe and gave her a meaningful look. She understood and stood up. Ma'am, let me help you. We feel bad for intruding like this. While they were in the kitchen, I dashed to the bedroom and gently pushed the door open. Inside was an incredibly fat little boy. He must have weighed over 400 pounds. Rolls of fat cascaded down his body. The fat on his arms jiggled with his every move. His facial features were squeezed together, making them hard to distinguish. Who are you? What do you want? I'm your neighbor from downstairs. I'm visiting today. The little boy struggled to open his tiny, beady eyes to look at me. This is my room. Get out. I heard you have a lot of basketballs. I love basketballs too. The little boy went quiet. I didn't have much time, so I started searching the room. The moment I opened the closet, I stumbled back a few steps. It was filled from top to bottom with human heads. One of them belonged to the man who had stolen my meat. All the eyes on the heads were wide open in terror, as if they had witnessed something horrific before they died. Are you here to play a game with me? I love games. The little boy's excited voice came from behind me. I fought down my fear and walked back to the closet. There were so many heads, big and small, men, women, old and young. Were these heads the basketballs the boy was playing with? If so, which one was his favorite? None of the heads looked particularly special. Fighting my revulsion, I started picking them up and examining them. I went through several, but found nothing unique. I was getting anxious. Time was running out. If the woman found me in here, it would be impossible to explain. Which one was his favorite? Suddenly, I heard Phoebe's voice get much louder from the other room. I knew they were about to come out. I hesitated for a split second, then grabbed a random head from a corner and stuffed it into my backpack. The little boy didn't try to stop me. He just clapped his hands excitedly. It's been so long since anyone's played with me. You better hide it well. If you don't. I didn't answer him. I hurried out of the room. I just sat down on the sofa when Phoebe and the woman returned. She handed me a cup of tea, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. It had a strong, metallic smell, and the liquid itself was murky. I pretended to touch the cup to my lips, then made an excuse that it was getting late and rushed everyone out. The woman politely saw us to the door. Just as we were leaving, a strange sound came from inside her apartment. Her smile suddenly looked menacing. I quickly said my goodbyes and shut the door. Slam! The door flew open again. A man's head was turned toward us, but his body was facing away. His blood-red eyes stared at us with terrifying hatred. Damn it! I must have chosen the wrong ball. The old man said that if we chose wrong, the father would appear immediately. If the ball was wrong, running was pointless. We had to have the right one to hide it. The little boy waddled out, a cruel smile on his fat face that didn't match his age. I'm gonna get a new basketball. He started clapping his hands by the door. I threw my backpack at them and lunged forward, twisting the man's head off his neck. The moment I tore the father's head off, his body went rigid and froze in place. I slammed their door shut and turned to the others, glaring. What are you waiting for? Run. That snapped them out of their stupor, and they took off down the hall after me. As I ran, I glanced back. Strangely, the three of them weren't chasing us. Right? I remember the rules. If you find the brat's favorite ball, you have to hide it. During the hiding part of the game, they can't chase you. Otherwise, the game would be pointless. You better hide it well. I'll count to 30, then I'm coming to find you. Sure enough, the brat's voice echoed in our ears. 1, 2. Hearing him count down only made me more nervous. We're on this floor, could we hide it where he'd never find it? Time was almost up, and we were all in a panic. We couldn't hide it in a neighbor's apartment. But this floor was just an empty hallway with nowhere to hide anything. I had to take a gamble. 30. Here I come. The brat, looking like a small mountain, waddled toward us, his flesh quivering. We stood off to the sides. I stood at the front, my hands behind my back, watching as he searched along the walls. He circled us, checking our hands and behind our backs. Seeing nothing, he moved on and continued searching the hallway. After searching back and forth a few times, the brat started to get impatient and stomped around angrily. Why isn't it here? Where did you hide the ball? The smile was gone from his face. He stared at me with a dark expression. Admit that you lost, and I'll tell you. He snorted and went back to searching. After 2 more sweeps, he still hadn't found it. Tell me, where's the ball? Admit you lost, and I'll tell you immediately. Fine, you win. Now, can you tell me? Phoebe was about to celebrate, but I stopped her. You have to say it, word for word. I admit that I lost. A flash of murderous intent crossed the brat's eyes. Finally, he reluctantly repeated my words. After making sure there were no loopholes, I pointed to the door of his own apartment. His expression froze. Everyone else looked just as shocked. When the brat had first come out the door, I had quickly thrown the ball back inside his apartment. No one dared to say a word. Back downstairs, I explained my logic. If we had understood the rules properly, we would have known how to survive. Choose the wrong ball, and the father appears immediately. That meant the father was directly linked to the correct ball. When I pulled out the wrong head, the father appeared, just as the rules said. And he appeared with his head facing us, but his body facing away. His head was on backwards. That was a hint. The father's head was the brat's favorite ball. Only by choosing it would the father not appear. As for why I dared to throw it back into their apartment, that was another hint in the rules. You cannot hide the ball in a neighbor's apartment. The upper floor was just a long hallway with no real hiding places. They wouldn't give us an impossible task that would be pointless. And the other rule, if the brat finds the correct ball, we're in danger. That meant the ball could only be found by the brat himself. When he came out to look, he came out alone. This confirmed my theory. So, I hid the ball in his own home. By the rules of the game, his family couldn't tell him where it was. After listening to my analysis, everyone showered me with praise. I gave a wry smile. I just watch a lot of TV and read a lot of books. I couldn't guarantee I'd be right every time. After we completed the ball hiding task, we had a week of rest. The old man didn't issue any new tasks. I spent every day reviewing everything we'd been through, reminding myself to be careful. One wrong move, and I could lose my life forever. Tonight, you will choose the upstairs female neighbor's favorite outfit. The neighbor dislikes the color black. Her favorite outfit is very close-fitting. The neighbor likes dresses and thinks shorter is cuter. The outfit you choose must be put on her. Only the correct choice can be worn. Remember to observe the neighbor's makeup. Her makeup and her dress are a set. I memorized every word of the old man's rules. Night fell quickly. The open door on the floor above was the female neighbor's apartment. It was not what I expected. The room was incredibly bright, the light almost blinding. The room was filled with mirrors. Every wall was covered in them. "Hello, is anyone home? Come in." When we entered, we didn't see the neighbor. We just heard the sound of running water from the bedroom. Was she taking a shower? We sat on the sofa, not daring to move around. We could only look around the room, hoping to find some clues. It was clear the neighbor loved mirrors. Even the ceiling was a mirror. The refrigerator was covered in a mirrored film. Sitting on the sofa, I could see infinite reflections of myself. The bedroom door opened. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. So beautiful she didn't look real. Her face was a perfect, flawless oval without a single visible pore. Her eyes were full of emotion, watery and bright. Her eyelashes were long, dark and curled. Her lips were a soft pink over pearly white teeth. She was wearing a silk nightgown, her creamy white, graceful body barely hidden beneath it. Some of the male residents were staring at her, completely mesmerized. "Thank you all for coming to help me choose my clothes tonight." She smiled slightly and pointed her bedroom door. "All my clothes are in there. You can go and choose." Her bedroom was enormous, almost entirely filled with wardrobes. There was also a separate walk-in closet. The walk-in closet was also huge, packed with clothes. There was a vast variety of styles, but there was nothing for fall or winter. Everything was for summer. I picked up a random dress. The fabric felt incredible. I touched several more. They all felt amazing. I held them up to the light. If an outfit was worn often, there would be faint signs of wear. The light passed through the fabric, fine and even. I checked several outfits, but couldn't find anything unusual. At that point, a few of the men walked out, each holding an outfit. After they left, there was a long silence. I frowned. Had they chosen correctly? "Hey, those guys are gone," Phoebe whispered in my ear. She had been watching them secretly. They had walked out with the clothes and just vanished. The door had closed after we entered. They had disappeared without a sound. I stared at the racks of clothes, completely stumped. With so many outfits, which one was her favorite? More people started walking out, one by one, each carrying the dress they thought was the right one. But just like the first group, they went out, and then there was silence. I was holding a purple dress. I stood by the door, peeking out to see what was happening. The men who had just left with the clothes were now standing frozen in place. The female neighbor ran along, transparent fingernail over the fabric of a dress, a faint smile on her face. As she turned, she paused for a moment. The men standing before her walked, one by one, directly into a mirror. The surface of the mirror rippled like water, then went still. So, everyone who chose wrong went into the mirrors? I watched this happen, an idea forming in my mind. "Is this the one you've chosen for me?" The female neighbor walked up to me, her eyes fixed on the dress in my hand. "Do you like purple?" "I do. I like everything except black. Let me look a little more, just to be sure." I took the dress back to the closet and hung it up. Suddenly, I remembered something. I went back and felt the white clothes, and then the other colored clothes, examining them carefully. I held them up to the light again. An idea was solidifying in my mind. "So, which one do you think is right? Do you have any idea?" Phoebe looked at me, embarrassed. "I'm not smart enough for this. I don't have a clue. Whatever you choose, I'll go with it. I trust you." I patted Phoebe's cold hand reassuringly. Everyone who had a theory had already gone out. The few who remained were all watching me. I hung the white dress I was holding back on the rack. "I know which one it is. Let's go." Phoebe looked at me, surprised that I had already figured it out. The female neighbor was sitting on the sofa, maintaining a perfect posture. When she saw us come out, she gave us a practice smile. "Have you found it?" "We have. You're already wearing it." She looked at me innocently and gestured to her nightgown. "Are you talking about this?" "No. I'm talking about the one you're wearing underneath. Or, to be more precise, your skin. The woman's smile froze. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. Are you sure? I'm sure. She stared at me, then slowly reached up and let her nightgown slide off. Her body was perfect, like white jade, without a single flaw. Then, her mouth began to open, wider and wider, until we saw a hand reach out from inside. We watched in horror as another woman climbed out of the beautiful woman's mouth. After everything we had been through, this was the most heart-stoppingly grotesque thing I had ever seen. This new woman's body was covered in scars. There wasn't a single patch of smooth skin, and on the scars, tiny white worms writhed and squirmed. We survived the task of choosing the female neighbor's favorite outfit. The clues were in the rules. The outfit was very close-fitting, and we had to observe the neighbor's makeup. The beautiful neighbor wasn't wearing any makeup. Her face was just too perfect, without a single flaw, not even a pore. That's what made me suspicious. Also, the clothes felt too good. They weren't made of any normal fabric. After I explained my reasoning, Phoebe was completely in awe of me. We had a few days of rest. I spent the time reviewing all the clues we'd gathered, waiting for the old man to announce the next task. The final task, find the building manager. You must complete this task individually. The building manager is hidden among all the residents. Each of you has 3 chances to question the upstairs neighbors. Some of what they say will be true, some will be false. You must figure out which is which. All right, the final task begins now. You succeed by finding the building manager. If you fail to find them within 3 days, you will remain here forever, just like the neighbors upstairs. The old man, his back hunched, delivered the news with a strange, somber tone before shuffling away, looking almost lonely. Staring at the closed doors on the floor above, I walked to 4009. He was my first choice. I'd had the most contact with this neighbor, and he seemed the most reasonable. After I explained my purpose, he was silent for a long time. The manager is a very kind person. Even in hell, their heart remains pure. That's it. He shook his head, pointed upwards, and then refused to say another word. I left him and went to the bratty kid's apartment. This time, the father answered the door. He was still in the same position, head facing me, body turned away. He had a foul expression on his face, his eyes glaring at me. I'm here to ask about the building manager. His expression was odd. He looked at me strangely, as if lost in thought. After a moment, he spoke. The manager is a strange person, always trying to save everyone. But it's not that easy. He seemed to realize he'd said too much and quickly added, the manager is a very responsible person. Before I could react, he slammed the door shut. So far, I had 2 clues, very kind and very responsible. The neighbors seemed to think highly of the manager. As I was about to knock on the female neighbor's door, I saw that someone else was already inside. I turned my attention to the other apartments I hadn't visited. This part should be safe. Just asking questions. When I knocked on the door of 4011, my scalp tingled. The neighbor who answered was the woman I had seen through the peephole on the very first night. Her dangling eyes swiveled to look at me. Hello, I'm your neighbor from downstairs. I'm looking for information about the building manager. Her voice was hoarse and cold. The manager is dead. I was stunned. The manager is dead? But the old man said the manager was among all the residents. How could they be dead? After leaving her, I tried to piece together the 3 clues. A very kind and responsible manager is dead? Which one of them was lying? I trusted the neighbor from 4009, so that left the brat's father and the woman from 4011. Who was lying? The old man said the manager was among all the residents. There were still neighbors I hadn't even met. As I was thinking, Phoebe came back. She gulped down some water and then came over to share what she'd learned. The 3 neighbors she spoke to all described the manager as a madman, a ruthless person, someone terrifying. We stared at each other. How could the descriptions be so different? For the next 2 days, I went over the clues again and again, but I still had no idea. There were still neighbors in this building I hadn't met. I didn't know if the manager was one of them. Hey, this is for you. Phoebe suddenly handed me a lollipop. It had a colorful wrapper with stars and moons on it, and it smelled sweet. I bought this the day before I came here. I really like you, but I don't have anything else to give you. This is all I have. I touched her cold hand and gave her a smile. The 3 days passed quickly, and the old man appeared right on schedule. Everyone from our floor was standing outside their doors. After all the tasks, there weren't many of us left. Have you found the building manager? The others all looked uneasy and shook their heads. Then, all at once, they turned to look at me. The old man's gaze followed theirs and landed on me. I sighed. They were all counting on me. If I got this wrong, we'd be trapped here forever. I took a deep breath. If I'm wrong, and you all get stuck here forever, will you be okay with that? We're not smart enough, one of them said. If it weren't for you, we would have died a long time ago. If you're wrong, then that's just our fate. I looked at them. The trust in their eyes was deeply moving. I hope my theory was right, for their sake. I turned to face the old man. The building manager isn't here anymore, are they? Everyone froze, staring at me in disbelief. Even the old man looked stunned. Are you saying there is no manager? The old man rasped, his expression unreadable. The previous manager is gone. But the rule for this task was to find the manager among all the residents. After I came back, I kept thinking, there are neighbors upstairs we never had the time or opportunity to meet. But we only had 3 chances to ask 3 neighbors. We never had the chance to meet everyone. That's a bug in the system. I thought about it for a long time, and I finally figured it out. The real reason is that the building manager isn't one of the upstairs neighbors. I turned and looked at Phoebe. Actually, for a while, I suspected you were the manager. Phoebe flinched. I smiled at her, but then I realized you weren't. You're something more like an evaluator, aren't you? In every task, you were right there beside me, quietly observing me. My theory is that the manager is chosen from among us on this floor. I took out the candy from the 4009 neighbor and the lollipop Phoebe had given me. I also took out the smiley face doll. Phoebe and the neighbor in 4009 aren't ordinary residents, are they? After I finished speaking, the air grew thick with a strange silence. The old man stared at me for a long time without a word. Phoebe's expression was complicated. When did you figure it out? She asked. Every time I touched your hand, you never had the warmth of a normal person. I started suspecting then, and no matter how scared you acted, you were always calm underneath. Not like a newcomer facing death for the first time. The old man clapped his hands, a look of relief on his face. He was right to choose you. So clever. You're correct. A new manager is indeed chosen from your floor. Those 2 have already chosen you. You're the new building manager. The previous manager became lost in time, trying to save the people trapped here. Through time, he saw you and brought you here. He was one of the original residents, a warden meant to suppress the abyss beneath this building. He saw your potential and used the abyss's power to plant a whisper in your mind. You had to agree to come here. I remembered a thought that had appeared in my head a long time ago. It all made sense now. Then what are you? What's your role here? Me? The old man's shoulders slumped. I was appointed by the last manager to be an overseer. I'm responsible for announcing the tasks and explaining the rules. Only a new manager can suppress this place. The creature that stole the eyes from 4009 came from the abyss. With the manager gone, the rift to the abyss is unguarded, and monsters have been crawling out. If it's not sealed, the human world will face its own catastrophe. Find the building manager. Your task is complete. Your wishes can now be granted. The other girls stepped forward excitedly, chattering about their wishes. I shook my head, watching them. Human greed is a bottomless pit. After the girls stated their wishes, they suddenly froze. Their bodies began to change, twisting into monstrous forms, not unlike the neighbors upstairs. They were no longer human. Phoebe stood beside me, looking at them with pity. Their wishes were granted, she said softly. But unfortunately for them, not a single one of them wished to go home. Now, they'll be staying here forever.